And then let's security waiting room. View. Admit. All right, video is coming on. Hey, Melissa. Okay, I'm going to be doing a lot of admitting of people.
Okay, just confirming you guys can hear me with these. Are my things working? Okay, just
Yes.
want to make sure. I will go remute myself.
I just realized I need to turn on the air conditioner here. Just 1 second.
I'm formulating my questions.
We're going to hang out until we have to go make dinner for hungry preteens.
Ah, yes.
Who are youth grouping.
They need a secondary scout badge, Kirsten. I think they needed to keep cooking.
They did. I got a lot of mileage out of the cooking merit badge. I think they should go. Yeah, they need an advanced cooking merit badge.
Exactly.
All right. All right, now I have a name, so that's good. Well, thank you guys all for coming on. We'll wait a couple minutes. There's Lynn. Hey, Lynn. So Jim, are you recording the game?
I have it on in the background.
I see.
But baseball goes on for like 5 days, so
exactly.
I won't miss much.
Yeah, who would have guessed that the Dodgers would still be here?
Yeah, being down 3-1. Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't looking so good. But after they beat our Padres, I thought, well, I guess I better root for the Dodgers. I certainly don't want to root for the Astros. Hope I didn't say anything offensive there. I'm just gonna got a few more people coming in.
Oh yeah, I would imagine for the 5 minutes or so,
yeah,
we'll get people coming in. So I'm guessing Beth Aiello is a Coronado person with that great picture of the hotel down in your neck of the woods.
There you go. Yeah. There. Oh, look, and now you're floating out in the ocean, Beth.
She's on her yacht.
Yeah, right. People coming in. So you finished today, right, Jim?
We did. That's right.
And do you still have one more Wednesday night class?
We do, yeah. So Melissa, we've been doing on our Wednesday evening online. We call it Food for Thought. It's a when we were meeting in person, it was a gathering for about an hour after work, sitting around tables, and there would be small group icebreaker type questions, then a short couple songs for worship and a prayer. Then we would eat together, and one of the pastors would give a short kind of inspirational message. And we would have anywhere from 30 to 75 that would come to that. And then when we went virtual, of course, we can't be eating together, but we still have the gathering, and we'll have probably anywhere from 12 to 25 that come on. And so my associate pastor, who's running youth group right now, which is why he won't be able to be on, he decided to pick 7 other chapters from your book and called it Additional Recipes for Tasting Grace. So between the two of us, we'll have preached or taught on 14 of your chapters. So our folks are in deep, whether they like it or not.
I love that. Can you guys also maybe get a jump start on book 2? So just, something to throw out there for you.
You want us to write it, or do you want us to start prepping for it?
I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
I
I was
did.
gonna ask you to write it. One would think that 8 months of quarantine would have been enough for me to actually have birthed a second book, but the answer to that would be no, it was not enough time.
Well, what's the thing that everybody keeps saying? Just because we've had, quote, free time during quarantine doesn't mean we should be scolding ourselves for being less productive than we think we should be.
Thank you, Jim. That's a good word.
Yeah.
That never happens to pastors ever. So,
Well, and sometimes with everybody at home, if you don't have somewhere to go, it is more distracting than.
That's true. That's true. We'd love to hear at some point about your writing process, because Kirsten and Nils that are on me there, wave your hands, Kirsten. Kirsten's also a writer. She's a children's nonfiction writer. So I've heard a little bit about her writing process, but we'd love to hear about yours as well. And can you write when everyone's home, or do you have to, go up to some retreat center somewhere for 3 weeks and with wine tasting and all of that in order to get in the mood?
I'm voting on Scottish hotel room like J.K. Rowling.
There you go. There you go.
Melissa, the ones I mailed have just gotten us great conversations. They're all over beyond California, so it's been great. And they hear Robb's sermon, and then we get to talk, and it's been great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'll wait a couple more minutes just to see if we have people coming in.
I just wanted to say a shout out to my friend Cindy, who's in Hawaii. Wave your, there you go. She was part of my church when I was for 15 years in Aiea, the closest United Methodist church to Pearl Harbor. And she and her mom have been following along with this series as well. So
awesome. It's nice to cross state boundaries and things like that.
Bunch of time zones and all that.
Yeah. It's been interesting, to try and follow analytics and see who's coming in where and
How many are on right now, Robb?
Looks like about almost 20, I think.
Yeah, because I don't see more than about 5 or 6. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So in the
You have
top,
to swipe.
on the top corner, you can, that says view, you can hit speaker view or gallery view. And if you do,
Oh, there's the gallery view. Okay, I got it.
Hit.
And I want to give a shout out to Paul Matheny. He's one of our youth, but he is our tech person. So he's one of the 2 young youth and young adults that run the AV. So he's been doing all the behind the scenes stuff during this series as well. So great to see one of our youth coming out for this as well. He's giving up youth group in order to be here on the meet and greet, let alone the Dodger game. So
as we said, he can get to the Dodger game eventually.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Paul, what were you going to say, Paul?
I was waiting for the Dodger game, but then I heard that we were going to be doing this, and I had to give it up.
It's like no choice, right? It's no choice.
There was no choice.
Very nice, very nice. So it's a little bit, it's 5 after, and so let's just go ahead and get started. I'll say a couple things, and maybe we can do a mutual connection, because we do have people from different churches in different areas here, which reminds us that one of the chapters is how food is an invitation to connection. And so we're living that out right now. So I'm Robb Fuesler. I'm the pastor at St. Paul's in Coronado, and just really privileged to have a connection with Melissa. I think everybody who runs into Melissa feels like they have a privileged connection. She makes people feel just really good when she interacts with them, and I'm sure you'll find that as well. And I just, Jim explained this a couple times in the sermons that he preached, and as did I. This was kind of an experimental thing. All of us who are often disconnected as pastors, we had this thought that we could maybe collaborate on a sermon series. And so I think it was 7 of us took different themes and did a sample sermon on that theme, and then put it into a shared Google Drive. And then Melissa interacted with us. We had a Zoom call, and we talked about making sort of these videos, these how-to videos. Those are in Melissa's kitchen, and I can confirm that. And then each of us, I think there was inspiration in those sermons. But if you were to look at everybody's sermons, the pastors really didn't do a lot of duplicating. There were some neat ideas or neat stories that we could gather up, and so that was really fruitful. So I see a few of us here from Coronado. I'm going to let Jim say anything about that, and then I'll introduce Melissa. And I have a question for Melissa, and Jim has a question for Melissa, and then we'll just dialogue a bit.
Yeah, and why don't we say, whenever it's your turn to talk, first introduce yourself, where you live, which fellowship you're connected to before you ask your question. That way we get to know each other a little bit better.
So Jim, did you want to say anything else? I mean, have you done a sermon series like this before, collaboratively?
No, never. In fact, I was late to the party. Robb invited all of his close friends, the clergy people he liked, and they were meeting for months without me. And then he's like, oh, maybe I should invite Jim too. So I came in at the end. And Melissa, I actually plan, I do a preaching planning every summer, and I'm trying to, I plan 2 years in advance. So this past summer, I was planning 2022. My sermons, and again, not detailed, but just the big sweep. So I lay out over the calendar, because I found that gives me more of a time to be thinking about what I can add to that. So if I know something's coming up in a year or two on this topic, and I see a movie or read a book, then I can kind of pull that aside and put it all together. So I already had my series planned for this year, and Robb's like, yeah, you want to be a part of this thing? We're going to go in together. I'm like, yeah, I don't think so. And then he's like, well, it's a person from my church. We'll give you a free book. I'm like, sold. I'm in. Sign me up. And I have had so much fun. I do like to cook, only out of necessity. From when I was in high school, I had to play basketball, and I didn't have to play basketball. I played basketball. I lived 30 miles away from my high school. So by the time I got home from practice, I basically had to cook my own dinner, because my mom's like, yeah, we ate hours ago. And then through college and getting married early, I've always been the one that's cooked. So I cook kind of out of necessity, but I don't watch cooking shows. My friend Cynthia, who's here, she had to tell me that you're famous and all of that, because she's followed you, and I didn't know anything. But I've loved going through the book, and the sermon series has just been so much fun for me. And there's quite a number of Palmdale people here, so I think it's connected to them as well.
Well, before I ask Melissa, my thought was to have Melissa share 3 things that you wouldn't know about her from the book as a way of introduction. And I know that not everybody read the book, but I do want to say that Melissa gave me the book, An Uncorrected Proof, a while back. And I read it, and I kept emailing her about different things. And there were times where I was very deeply emotionally moved by some of the things that she said. There were other times where I just laughed. It felt really special to get to know Melissa more deeply. And what she writes, or what you get to know about her in the book, it's authentic. This is who she is. So, and And so we had a couple conversations about doing different things, and we're really excited. And then this pandemic hit, and then we came up with this idea of doing a collaborative sermon series. And thankfully, Melissa was all in on that. And so, Melissa, tell us 3 things about yourself that maybe we wouldn't know. And then Jim has a question for you, and then we'll open it up, as Jim said, to people asking questions.
Okay, thank you. So, wow, what a kind and lovely introduction. So thank you so much. And thank you for including me in this way with your communities. And what a joy to even just be thinking about God and his gifts to us with other people. So I'm so grateful to have that opportunity, even though we're kind of doing it in this sort of weird way with Zoom calls. And but isn't that the power, right, of God, that we can use these tools to draw closer to one another. So I'm delighted to be a part of that. So 3 things that you wouldn't know about me from the book, which parenthetically, I forgot how many things I had put in the book until like my
I was gonna say,
daughter-
I don't think there are 3 things that we don't know about her already. She had laid it all out there.
One of my daughters came out one morning, when like the galleys were out, not the real books yet. She was like, "Mom, I didn't know you'd been to jail." I was like, "Oh yeah, mental note. Have the conversation with the kids about mom going to jail, and how you don't want to do it." But I will tell you, I'm challenged and challenge accepted, Pastor Robb. So one, I once got to sing on stage with the Counting Crows. That's a fun thing that I think a lot of people don't know about me. 2, I wear other people's perfumes when I miss them. So like as a way of thinking about them. And it actually started with our dear friend Mindy, who passed away last year. And she's actually in the acknowledgements of Tasting Grace. And Mindy was sort of famous in our circles for being a fantastic gift giver. And what Mindy taught me about gift giving was that it was never about the gift. It was always about what the gift meant. And she always would write a note with the gift to make it really special. And so I had been her small group leader in Bible study one year. And at the end of the year, she wrote me a note with a little bottle of perfume called Pure Grace. And she wrote me this thank you note about how much grace she had gotten being in my group. And so I started carrying that perfume around in my purse, and it was sort of like my travel perfume. And I always thought of Mindy, and it wasn't even her perfume. I just would wear it. And it reminded me of Mindy, and I still keep it. And that actually led to a lunch with her, to the title of this book, Tasting Grace. And so that habit of having scents that I connect with friends and having that draw me close to them. So I actually have a few perfumes from other friends, like friends who you hug them and they smell like something, like they smell like them. And I've actually asked them what their perfume is. Is that weird? And now I have perfumes of some of my friends. So anyway, and then there are some days where I'm like, no, I mean, I've been wearing Chanel No. 5 for about 35 years, or 30 years. So I have my scent too. So I do that. Third thing, I'll tell you, is a fun purchase I just made, which is a coffee cup that says grateful on it. And there's a companion one that says thankful. And I got it at Target because I saw a friend of mine posted on Instagram a few days ago. So I literally went to Target. I had to do some shopping anyway. So I went to Target and I bought it, and they were $5 each. And this was 3 days ago. And those 2 cups have brought me so much joy. So you definitely wouldn't know about that in the book because it just happened. But I'm telling you because you can also get your cups from Target too. They're $5 each. So those are the 3 things.
Go tomorrow.
So are you saying, Melissa, the book was almost called Smelling Grace?
Yeah.
So close. So
So
close.
close.
I think the title's better. I like it. I think,
I think so too. Yeah.
Jim, you want to,
Yeah. Well, we were kind of joking about it, about how personal and autobiographical your book is. I remember once hearing a pastor, one of those, what do we call them, like all-star MVP pastors that, not only have a church, but travel all over the world. And, they write books and they speak and everybody loves them. And he said at one point, why do I find it easier to tell a random group of strangers all about my deepest, darkest, worst moments, but I have a hard time telling the people that are close to me that? And I was wondering, going from your mother's suicide to, as you mentioned before, your DUI and night in jail, and there's so many just wonderful stories that you put about yourself in there. How was that processed? And was it easy to do or a little bit challenging for you to put that out there for everyone, since this was kind of your first major book?
Excellent question. Because there is a lot of personal stuff that's in there. So I'll answer that probably in a couple of ways. First of all, I will say that for as much as I am really open about things I've processed, I am a very private processor. So for me, I don't ever share anything at the public level that I haven't processed and kind of come out on the other side of. And that's just the line that I draw for me. So it sort of strikes me as odd almost when people say, oh, you're so open, you let everybody in. And I feel like I'm actually really very private. But I'm very open about the lessons that I've learned in life and what those gifts have been, and sharing and connecting in that way. But like, for example, I almost never post anything, in real time or anything, because I'm so into, doing the thing. It's not until, later that I've kind of processed it. And even little things like, a sunset at the beach or whatever, like even something like that, I'm busy processing it. Like if you see a sunset picture of the sunset on the beach, it probably wasn't from today. It was probably from a few days ago. So for me, that's sort of how I balance that I really am full of joy in sharing with people what we've been through. But for me, I do that after I've been through it. And then the second way I'll answer that question is that for me, in part of I'm answering this sort of as kind of like the process piece of it. For me, I wrote most of Tasting Grace in the morning, like in the mornings, early in the morning. And I wrote it over several years. And I probably wrote it over less than that, but I was immersed in the ideas and in the prayer and in the Bible reading and in the, I'll call it research, but it wasn't research for a book, but research for myself. I was marinating in the themes and wrestling with the topics for several years in the mornings. And for me, what got me up in the morning was the idea of just being obedient to something that I felt like I had something to say about. For me, it really was obedience to God. And I started having this sense when I kind of was first wrestling with this idea that I felt like God had something to say about food that was different from what society was saying about food. This never came from, my agent calling and saying, you're a Christian, why don't you write a Christian book? It never came from that. It really came from a discontent feeling that God is saying something different about food than the food world is saying about food, and I couldn't reconcile it. And so I felt a sense of obedience to learning and leaning into what God has to say about food. I remember a leader of a Bible study that I was part of for a number of years talked about how we can so easily in today's society be really smart about lots of things and then claim complete ignorance when it comes to what does God have to say about something. So the example that we talked about in the Bible study was like, oh, if you want to buy a stroller, we'll spend hours looking at what the best stroller is, what the best price is, what, how many colors, like, will it go up steps? Can I take it on the subway? Like, we will research everything on the internet. We'll ask mom groups. We will do reading. We've got books on how to put kids in strollers. We will spend hours and hours and hours like researching this topic from top to bottom. And then when we're stumped on something when it comes to God, we're like, I don't know where to look. And I thought, you know what, that I felt this need to be obedient to find out, what does God have to say about food? Because I know what society is saying about food. And so, so to answer your question in a probably far more philosophical way than you were expecting, it came from this need to be obedient and to show up. And I will say now, putting my writer's hat on, for any writers out there, or anybody who's showing up to do anything in your work and your life or whatever it is, I also had in that call to be obedience, for me, I also had freedom from being good. And I just kept saying to myself, it doesn't have to be good. I have to be obedient. What God does with it is sort of his business, but I need to show up. I need to show up for this. And so I did. So it was really in the name of obedience. And then in order to get from A to B, then out come the stories of me being in jail. But it wasn't like I was dying to tell everybody that I was in jail. That really wasn't it. But to be clear, if I hadn't already processed that, then it wouldn't have been in the book.
Yeah.
Right?
Another follow-up, it's not really a follow-up, but kind of came out of what you were saying. I loved not only the part in the book, the RSVPs at the end of each chapter, but I really appreciated you creating the videos that we could tie into our series. It made it seem so much more personal because people could hear you and see you and get your heart from that. Well, where was the idea for that? How did that RSVP invitation come into this book for you?
Oh, I'm so glad you bring up the RSVPs because I love them. And it's the second time where sort of late in the process, I sort of reached out to, in a different book this happened, and then also now in this book, but where I reached out to the publisher and said, wait a minute, I have an idea. And they were kind of like, we've already formatted and whatever. So I'm glad to hear that you love them as much as I do. But I fight for the things that I really, really want. And sometimes you just need to be far enough out of a project to sort of say, I know what this project needs. So yes, parenthetically, in case you're wondering what the second thing was, I will just tell you, it was in $10 dinners where I suddenly was like, wait, we could have like this dot system where people could piece together their own $10 dinners. And so we layered in this whole like dot system where each recipe was had a code according to how much it cost. And it was, it really brought through on the promise of $10 dinners. Okay, but that aside, so the RSVPs, where did that come from? Well, here was what happened with Tasting Grace. I will tell you the behind the scenes that I think Pastor Robb knows, but not a lot of people know, which is that I wrote Tasting Grace twice. The first time I wrote it, it was really rich in theology, and I really researched everything. I mean, like I said, I was marinating in this topic for years. So there was just, like, the Bible has so much to say about food. And I mean, it's like, there's so much out there, and there's so many different ways to look at it, and so many different angles. And I mean, if I could show you the notes, like, I mean, like, so much out there. And so I'm like writing the book, and I was about 3 weeks away from my first, full manuscript deadline. And I called my agent, and I called the publisher and said, can we set up a quick meeting? Which is never the kind of meeting that a publisher and agent wants to hear, is that we all three need to get on the phone. And I was like, well, okay, so the good news is I'm like 80% done. And I think that, that, like I said, I've got the word count. The bad news is I think I've written the wrong book. I was like, I think I've written a textbook. I think I've written a book for someone like me who loves academia and like meaty stuff and thinking and all of this. And the problem is that I really was aiming for a book, what I would call airplane reading, but maybe not beach reading. So, entertaining enough that you might read it on an airplane, but it might have you jotting a few notes in the margin. Whereas like at the beach where you're like, the Frisbee, maybe it's a little bit too much for that. So that was sort of my aim. And what I had delivered was a study carrel at a quiet library, and you're in grad school reading, with definitely notes and that was not what I was shooting for. So I sent over the book to my agent and my publisher, who very nicely called me back and said, you are right.
Yeah.
We see what you're saying. And so we extended the deadline, and I got back to the work of saying, where does it turn academic? And that's really hard to pull out of a book. It's like pull all that out. So I pulled out all of that and like scrapped it off to the side. So like there's like a second book ready to go for the for somebody who likes that, to get into the mess. But what happened was then I overshot the mark, and the book became a little bit too fluffy. It kind of became a little bit like, oh, join me behind the scenes of Next to Network Star. And I thought there needs to be a place for somebody to at least have one or two Bible verses to go to, or chapters. I don't even want to point anybody to a verse, because I want them to be pointed to a section of the Bible and to appreciate the before and the after. I wanted to give them something to hang their hat on that was not me, right? I wanted this to be theologically sound. I wanted them to feel theologically safe. I wanted them to be carried by God's word, not my stories. And so I was like, how do we do that? How do I go from telling this story about like, oh, I had to cut up potatoes and, and fry them, and Bobby Flay's there and I'm freaked out. How do I go from that to what, God says in Psalms that, our times are in his hands? Like, how do I do that? How do I leap in voice and in tone? And how do I alert everybody, okay, we're leaving the fun part of this, little story, and now we're going to get, how do we do that? And that was one of those things where I suddenly was like, wait a minute, we can bring back in some of that in these RSVPs. And I felt like the RSVPs then, to me, it gave me a place to do two things. One is it gave me a place to hand the baton over to God's word, which is really where the excitement is, right? That's really where the excitement is when it comes to food and that invitation. The second thing it did is it also turned the story back over to the reader, so that they could be invited into thinking about their own food stories in the past and coming up, so they could suddenly kind of get back into the active role, get back into the driver's seat, and sort of have enjoyed my story. Maybe it informed something for them. Maybe it got them thinking about their own background, and gently brought up, look what God did and God does now. And now this can really be about you exploring that and you going into God's word. So it was sort of my answer to, I cut the Bible out of the book, and like Anne Lamott, who's a well-known Christian writer who writes about writing, in one of her books, I want to say Bird by Bird, but anyway, she celebrates the value of the shitty first draft. Sorry for the language, but Anne's words, not mine. But I think that she's right on. The shitty first draft. And I remember I after I'd cut everything out and got the fluffy version of Tasting Grace, which I'll call version 1A. It doesn't get its own billing. And I remember I called my publisher and got her on the phone, and the editor, and the three of us are on the phone. And I said, so just asking for a friend, how shitty can the first draft be and the actual book end up being okay? And we had a good laugh about it. But it was after that conversation where I said the Bible's gone from here. Like I literally said I refuse to put out something with my name that it just sounds like I'm just making this up, and that it's not like, and it's my own fault. I wrote the book, right? So I'm not saying you did it. I'm saying, what have I done? I took the Bible out of it anyway. So yeah, you know what? I know if you had like 10 questions in mind for this hour, you are already deciding which ones you're going to remove, because my answers are usually very rich and long. So there you go. But
I only had
that's the
2,
story
so
that I
I'm
gave
good.
you.
I'm
Oh,
going to
good.
hang
Well,
up and watch
then-
the Dodgers now. So no,
then
I'm
I'm
just kidding.
tracking. Great.
I'm going to mention just so you that one of the other things, and then I think this can come out a little bit, is I think when Melissa gave me the book, it was very nice of her to do, but I kept responding to it. I kept like emailing and things like that. And she said, the publisher was thinking of this as a women's target audience book. Do you think men would like it? I'm like, oh my gosh, this is just so rich. So I'll just throw out that's one more piece of this production of this book that I think was in there. So if you have a question or something you'd like to explore, why don't you, if you know how to use Zoom, you know that there's a hand raise thing, I think, the reactions, and you can do that, and Jim or I can call on you. But as Jim said, we want you to introduce yourself, say where you're from, and then ask whatever question you'd like to.
You can use the clapping hands or the thumbs up, either one of those.
Yeah, there's no hand up, right?
You can also just raise your hand and we'll.
That's true. We could go old school. We could do that.
We can do old school.
Yeah.
Did I tell everyone we're giving away a copy of the book for the first 3 people to ask a question? So Cynthia, yes, Cynthia.
Like, my hands up, did it not work? I'll be brave, because that's my spiritual gift, is I'm the one who will speak out when everybody else is too uncomfortable. It's a gift and a curse. So Melissa, it's so nice to meet you. I have followed you. Yes, I had to tell Pastor Jim you were famous. Yeah. And I follow you on Facebook too. And so one of the things that my husband was the cook, and he passed away a year ago. So I haven't quite figured out how to do this cooking thing, so I will. But I noticed on your Facebook, that you do the lunch, if you're eating alone, and I haven't gotten up the courage to do it yet, or my schedule. I moved away. I'm living with my cousin, her son. It's like a whole transitional situation going on right now. But one of these days I'm going to join you. And that's a neat idea. And so that's just, was it Zoom related, or did you do this before the pandemic or whatever? So that's just a wonderful thing you do.
Oh, Cynthia, I'm so glad that you raised your hand. And I love your bravery. And it is bravery. And I also just want to throw out there that we are also okay if we sit for a few seconds in silence. So, that doesn't freak me out at all. But I'm glad you broke the silence with your hand raise. And I love that your husband is so connected with your food memories, and that even this conversation just brings him into our connection. So thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that, and I'm delighted. To answer your question about the sessions, no, they were Zoom sessions, and they actually started during the quarantine. So back in like April, I want to say, that I had this idea of we were really hunkered at home because I have a daughter who had open heart surgery just before COVID. And by God's great timing, so we could actually be there in the hospital with her. But we were very hunkered down, so we didn't see anybody. And I thought, I have 6 people in my family, but I thought I'm actually even already sick of them. So if someone's alone, what must that be like? And so that's when I often use the word we when I mean I, like there's some big team, some big staff going on. So I decided to have these Zoom meals where people could bring their own food, and we would, eat together. And that kind of kept going on through the quarantine, and when we kind of went back to a little bit of normal world where we could kind of go outside. And it just was such a lovely space that I decided to continue it. And so it's no longer for people who are eating alone. It is for women. And we do meet on, we're meeting on Tuesdays for some logistical reasons. We are actually, weirdly, for the first time in 8 months, not meeting this Tuesday because I was actually supposed to be out of town right now, but I'm not. That's a different story. But the point is that I think you would love it. So it's free, so I'm not trying to sell you anything, other than the joy of just having you connect. And I will tell you, these women that I've connected with, and some come, once, some come every week, some come when they can. And it's been wonderful to hear about these stories of how people fit into our lives. And in fact, one of the women who lost her husband a couple of years ago, she hosts a podcast called, I'll have to think of it, but I did post it somewhere on my Facebook. But and so she comes to my group, and so I've had the joy of hearing a little bit about how her husband was the cook, and how is she navigating that space of having to cook for herself and her family, because she has kids still at home. And that's just been really beautiful. But I actually did her podcast, which was really a special place to be. I think food connecting us to people who have left us. There's something really special about our food memories and our food, our tastes and our the smells are so connected into our emotions. So that's a really powerful place to be thinking about how food brings us together. And I think if I could sort of summarize Tasting Grace, in sort of a few key themes, I would say one of those very key themes would be God gave us food to draw us closer to one another. And if we can quiet ourselves and pay attention to the small places where we are as imperfect human beings using food to separate from one another in really small, subtle ways, I think that could potentially change how we think about food, how we think about our connection to each other, to God, how that could draw us closer into Him. So one of those really tender spaces is in that conversation around how food connects us to the people that we've lost, and how we can also use that very food to put us shoulder to shoulder with one another, and that way we could support each other, right? And have our sorrows and double our joys. So anyway, thank you for that topic and that question, Cynthia.
So I'll mention if people are forming a question. I remember so vividly. I don't think I told you this, Melissa, over our many conversations, but I had an Old Testament professor who was like this he was from Germany, very academic, and one of the things I remember him talking about multiple times was how important it would be for somebody to do their PhD dissertation on the theology of food. And he just said it. I remember him just going off on how much it's there. And I noticed, like just in looking at the parable of the prodigal son, there's so many mentions of food in there. It's just pretty phenomenal. I remember the son being mentioned. I remember the older son being mentioned. The dad, I remember the feast. But, there's so much going on with food. So it's all over. So maybe you can write dissertation.
Well, and I have to tell you, I thought maybe just a book on the parables and food. I love that idea. And you mentioned something that just gets me excited. So I want to just pretend there was a question there and that you were inviting me actually to comment on that, but you weren't. But I love this idea of the theology of food. And I love this idea, and it was sort of what kind of got me, kind of helped me get my arms around what I wanted Tasting Grace sort of to be about, what was going to be the scope of what piece of that food, faith intersection did I want to write about, or did I want to kind of think about, I should say, and then I'll write what's here. And that is that as Christians, when I think about food and I think about faith, we think about, often the conversation is around, what we talk about, sitting around the table. And that's wonderful and that's lovely, but that just seemed to be a pretty reductive view of how God views food, given how much it's throughout the whole Bible. There's some conversation about about agricultural and creation care, mostly in academic circles, and then there's the conversation about feeding the poor, which also sort of fits in there. But again, even these three conversations don't seem to be all that robust. And when I started reading the Bible about, what does God have to say about food? That was my question. What does God have to say about food, and how is it different from what we're saying about food? That's what drove me every day. And when I started reading the Bible about God and food, I started thinking about the entire food life cycle, from the seed and from the soil to getting planted, and to the farming, and to the harvesting, and to the processing, and to the shipping, and to getting sent to some sort of distribution channel, whether it's like a farmer's market or a supermarket, and then the purchase decision, and then the money behind it, and then bringing it home, and then the treating of the ingredients and the cooking, and then the worthy work of serving it to people at a table, and the fact that we all stop our lives and we are patient then, not only when we are planting and waiting, but now when we're waiting for the stew to cook. And so then we're all sitting down, and now we're patient waiting for, Uncle Larry to tell his story or whatever. And then we've got to clean up, and then we've got to put the dishes away, and that worthy work. And so there's this whole life cycle right, that we experience just sort of in modern food world, right? From the soil and what's, all the microbes that are in the soil that are feeding these plants, and all the way to when I'm putting dishes away, kind of the next morning, wiping off the final drops that my dishwasher didn't dry off, right? So there's from this to this. And if I were to look at that whole life cycle and kind of put it up, like at the top of like a very large piece of paper or whiteboard, which I did, and I could kind of like go underneath each one of those phases and sort of say, what does God have to say about this? What does God have to say about the soil and the whatever? What does God have to say about the worthy work of putting away the dishes? What does God have to say about inviting people into our home and the table? What does God have to say about all of these little pieces of the food life cycle? And so when I did that, I kind of created this sort of matrix of what does it mean to eat theologically? What does it mean to lean into God's best for us in each of these squares, right? And so I kind of looked at this big grid, this big matrix of like all of this stuff. And I literally went through and like kind of boxed out sort of the ones that I'm going to talk about in Tasting Grace. So Tasting Grace is 16 of those boxes, but there's so much more. So to answer your Old Testament professor's question, Pastor Robb, yes, I accept the challenge to write that dissertation. And it will all be based on my matrix that I created when I just pulled 16 of those to talk about Tasting Grace.
Awesome. Thank you, Melissa. Kirsten, you had a question?
Sure. So I'm Kirsten Larson. We go to Palmdale United Methodist. We're in Lancaster. And I have a different project for you. So we have tween boys. They're almost 12 and 14. They're both Boy Scouts. They've done their cooking merit badge. So they've learned a little bit about cooking. And also our youth group has in the past had a garden that they've tended over by the church. And the boys watched pretty much all the sermons with us based on your book. And I just was thinking, this would be it would be so great to adapt it for a middle school audience, maybe for a youth group audience. There's so many, a lot of kids have issues with food, or they may, find the lunchroom a scary place, right? At lunch, if you don't see your friends, and, can be hard to eat alone. But I just, as I thought about the kids and I thought about how they've responded to some of the things that they've seen, just in the little bit that they've seen, I've just thought this would be such a great, middle grade adaptation for youth group. I think it would really resonate with a lot of kids.
Oh, I love that you're thinking that way. And I love the idea. So basically Tasting Grace, but the jail and suicide chapters removed. Got it. No problem. I can do that.
And more interactions with your daughters.
Like when you guys were, planting your Brussels sprouts and harvesting your asparagus. And I think a lot of that, it really resonates with kids. So anyway, I thought it was just a really cool audience.
No, and I'm kind of just joking around. But I really like that idea. I like that idea. So thank you for bringing it up. I think that's actually a really neat idea. I like that. And I almost wonder if it could be like a Tasting Grace, like, and now I'm in brainstorm mode, but I almost feel like maybe there could be like a kid's version of it. And then maybe they're like some like recipes and like, like this is dinner you can make for your family if you're 10 and above or whatever. I don't know. So, it could kind of be like that.
This is all my evil plan to have my kids have to cook more food for me. So they're done with the cooking merit badge. Now I need something else.
Yes, we need to take it next level. Thank you so much for the idea.
I do just want to say that when Melissa brainstorms, man, It is some rich stuff going on. So yeah, thanks for getting her going on that. I love it. So anybody else have a, yeah, Sue, did I call, let's see. I need the Lee Haskell one to go on to mute. I'm sorry.
Okay.
There you are.
I love that idea because our views on food are so warped because so much of our food is artificial. And especially for kids, if they know how it's grown and how it's made, and cooking is a life skill and they don't teach it in school anymore. And, you know, they think all this twisted stuff is food and it's not. So I love that. I know one youth group did a little workshop with the kids where they brought in fresh ripe strawberries and then things that were artificially strawberry flavored and had them taste the berries first and then had to taste the artificial version. And they did that with several different foods. So I think that's a really fun idea.
Why don't you share what you do?
I'm an integrative pediatrician, so I take diet histories every day, and it's pretty funny sometimes. There's what I call a green tongue disease, when you ask the kid to stick out their tongue and their tongue is green because they've had a green lollipop on the way to your office.
I just thought that would be especially appropriate given your reflection. People to know where you're coming from.
Exactly.
You know, I'm so glad that you and thank you, Pastor Robb, for giving the context of your job. But I'm so glad that you bring that up, and I love this idea. I remember, I can't remember if it's in the book somewhere, but that one of my kids once asked me, like, if people are gonna do artificial flavor, why are we doing artificial flavors? And I remember one of my kids said, wisely, no, because sometimes strawberries aren't in season. As if they're only making this, these lollipops artificially flavored, in the winter, but in the summer months, it's all made with the fresh stuff, And then, another one of my girls was like, yeah, but then why don't they come up with their own flavors? Strawberries already taken, make up your own. If you're going to be artificial, just make up something different. So I love that, that kind of sweet, innocent look at the artificial flavor world. But what scares me even more than the, oh, okay. So it was in the chapter on delight. Okay. So yes. So apparently I did put it in there. This is what happened. I will say that's the downside of cutting out 60% of your book and then publishing. You're like, wait, what actually made it in here? I mean, I've read it, but sometimes I don't remember if one little tiny example made it in or not. But what scares me even more, and this I know is in the book, but what scares me even more than the artificial lollipop, although I don't like artificial colors and flavors, that scares me. But what scares me more is that we as a society are embracing a lot of this stuff as health food. That's what makes it even more nerve-wracking for me, is that there's a lot of health food food that people are eating in the name of health, because they don't want to have, the calories or the whatever. And completely the proxy for health in modern day society is probably what kind of scares me the most. And we've come up with some really quick proxies for what health is. And I think that's it's keeping us from leaning into and trusting the food system that God has created for us. He has created our palates. He has created the food for our palates. I have to believe that he did it in a way that our palates would be satisfied by the food that he has given us. And so when we stop trusting that feedback loop, and we kind of get out of it and say, yeah, but I want a concentration of sugar that is not available in an average peach. So, but I also don't want to have the sugar that goes with it. So my solution is to kind of trick the system and come up with this weird chemical that tastes like a peach, but isn't, whatever. So yeah, and in the conversation in the book, I talk about like the artificial sweeteners and how getting outside of that feedback loop, getting outside of God's system, for me is problematic. And you know what? It's not because I think, oh, well, we all should do better. We shouldn't have Diet Coke. No, I just think we're missing out on God's best for us. So it's not that we need to feel guilty because we had a Diet Coke, or we need to feel bad because we have an artificial sweetener in our pancake syrup. It's not that. It's just that we're missing out. It's not an admonition from God. It's an invitation into his best for us. So could it be that we don't need to feel guilty about it, but we are also invited into something so much richer, so much more rewarding, so much more satisfying, and so much more in line with what God wants for us? Could it be just an invitation and not an admonition? And I think it is. But anyway, thank you for bringing up the kids and the strawberries.
Yeah, as you talk about that, there's this whole idea, it comes from a particular, you'd be familiar, theological school, about God wooing. God is constantly wooing us into the right direction. But God, we're not, God isn't the cyborg, where we will be assimilated, but we'll be wooed into relationship. And food is a woo technique, right? I mean, we know that relationally that,
just ask Cynthia that she got wooed by food.
Yeah. So but that's what do you do when you're establishing a romantic relationship? It's food, you go out for dinner or something like that. There's often that's part of it. So I love that. I think that word invitation was very important for me. I loved how you used it. It gave me permission to use it a lot. This is just an invitation. You can say yes or no. So anybody else there that? Yes, Pam, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yes, not a question. I just want to say how rich I found your book. And it was such a different way of looking at food. I mean, look at what I really want to say is that I love the idea that you just brought up earlier about marinating. And it's just like every time that we've been talking about this, I really feel like for instance, this morning we talked about hospitality. And, but if you ask me point blank about it, I really want to marinate and go back over it and get it, and then also I want to say, I guess these are just remarks and not a question, but then also I really love the fact that, there's certain parts that I will take with me and keep with me and, or just insights that I had never thought of before. And I really thought that was really neat. And that's what I really loved about this experience. It wasn't just a book and a book study and a set of sermons. It's the brainstorming and that's one thing. The different aspects about food, the actual food and the content of food, and then the ingredients, and then the fact that, no, we're not talking about that today. We're talking about how people interact and the fact that it does bring us together, and that the fact that it's not just doing this in our life, it's God's focus. So anyway, but that was my reaction to it. And thank you so much.
Pam, thank you for the comments. Yeah, thank you. That I received that really into my heart. So thank you. And I would like to say, I shared with, when I was on book tour last year before COVID came along, I shared at one of my last stops that I was on the plane and I had gotten a salad like on the plane, like, so it's airplane food. So it's not great food, theoretically, right? And I got this salad, and it was just this like chicken, like salad with this pesto dressing, and like they set it down, and I'm exhausted, and there I am, and I'm eating the salad, and I'm suddenly like, oh, there's like peppery, kind of like, it was like arugula or some mixed greens of some sort. And I'm like looking at the guy at the aisle across from me, and he's eating, the same salad. And I'm thinking, we're having these greens are probably grown from the same biome of that earth. And so we probably have, some similar nutrients, and like we're sharing this, like this live thing, this DNA, and we're having the chicken, and maybe the chicken is from the same chicken, and we're like putting it into our bodies. And I sort of had this sense of like, this intimacy of like, I'm sharing the same food with this person here. And this peppery arugula, which was really flavorful. And then there were chopped tomatoes, and they were really quite red and nice for an airplane salad. And if you read my book about gardening, like growing tomatoes is really hard. It's really hard. And these tomatoes are pretty darn good. And I'm 35,000 feet up in the air. And so I'm thinking I would like tomato growing tips from the person who grew this tomato, because I am not capable of making a tomato this sweet. And it was pretty darn good. And there I am then having the pesto dressing, which was really balanced. I had a little bit of lemon, a little bit of vinegar, but it was made with cilantro, not like your typical basil. So I thought, wow, what a creative idea. Who wrote this recipe? And what do they do? I would like for them to know that this is actually a really perfectly balanced dressing, and it's great on this salad. And so I'm feeling connected to the person who has written this recipe probably months ago. And then the lady comes to give drinks, and I'm getting my sparkling water, and she hands it to me, and I pull out my earphone just long enough to tell her, yeah, sure, lime would be great or whatever. And she hands it to me, and there I am, it's just a smile. It's just a quick thing, but there I am feeling like we've connected over water and lime and my meal. And I'm there just saying my prayer before I eat, and saying grace, and leaning into that habit of gratitude and of grace before I eat, and just pausing for a moment to honor that a chicken has died for this meal. And here I am, and all of these invitations are in this salad. And I can no longer be steeped in this world of talking about all these invitations without it having its impact on the very next meal that I eat. And I can hardly look at a meal without finding some of those invitations. Yeah, sure, there's 16 in this book, but there are unlimited invitations, aren't they? I only picked 16 of the boxes, but even in a meal, I find 4 or 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 of those at every meal. And it doesn't have to be a great meal. It's not just the farm to table meal that can invite us into all of this. It can be a granola bar. My goodness, it can be a Delta airline salad. So it is meant to be more than a book. It's meant to be a changing of how we relate to our very next meal, be it a granola bar, be it a frozen meal, be it something that someone made for us, be it something that we were stressed out about making because it's 6 p.m. on a Tuesday and I haven't figured out dinner for my family yet again. Whatever that is, we can find all of those invitations in that meal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So in the midst of the pandemic, Melissa, you found a way to connect to people, right? With these Zoom meals. I'm just wondering if there's other things in the midst of the pandemic, maybe a couple things or one thing that beyond that you've realized, and given your vocation, to and your passion for not just food, but helping people into it. That's one of the things I like so much about what you do. $10 recipes is not, or your $10 meals. That's not like you're trying to tell people how to make the most complex thing in the world. You're trying to like equip people to actually be able to share a meal. So I'm just wondering if there's anything from the pandemic, anything else.
Yeah, yes, there is. And it's sort of, I would say, the companion, the corollary, if you will, to the chapter on delight. And I think I hint at this, but I'm going to pull it out. It became more obvious to me through the pandemic. And that is, as much as we are invited into delight, is that my earphones going? Is that what happens when earphones lose their, can you guys still hear me?
We can hear you.
We can still hear you.
You can, okay, good. Because I suddenly heard this like, doo, 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 doo. So I'm like, does that mean this is over? I don't know what happened. Anyway, but I think that we can sometimes in society prioritize taste above all else. And what I have learned is to find the joy in the other gifts in food. So in other words, what tastes best isn't necessarily, or I should say, I don't necessarily get the most delight out of what necessarily tastes the best. Does that make sense? So I'll give you an example. When we couldn't get out of the house at all, one of my neighbors brought me lemons and, put them on my porch. Gosh, we hadn't had lemons in like a couple of weeks because this was back when you couldn't get Amazon delivery, you couldn't get anything. And so like these lemons, like these really simple lemons, just the joy of them. And, and I remember one night we had run out of any typical proteins. And so I made tomatoes and potatoes for my family. Now, normally that would be kind of like a side dish, but this is what we had for our main meal. Everyone had a small bowl of tomatoes and potatoes. There was enough food. That wasn't the smallness wasn't the issue, but it was tomatoes and potatoes. And you know what? We had just grown accustomed to sort of not plowing through our food like it's just completely unlimited. And you know what? We were completely satisfied. We have a pretty big pantry, so I've got like plenty of food. Like I can get other stuff, but what there isn't, there's no steak, there's no chicken, there's none of that. But I think that it helped me lean into the other gifts, the other invitations in food. And it made delight for me, not delight, it made taste for me less important. And I found delight through things beyond just taste. I guess probably a year ago, I would have said, well, a brownie brings me more delight than potatoes and tomatoes. But today I would say, I don't know, I guess it depends on how you're eating those tomatoes and potatoes and who you're eating them with, and who brought you the potatoes and who brought the tomatoes. And, delight has just a little bit changed. It used to be really linked to just the pure taste, and now it isn't.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, Marty, you want to unmute?
Yeah, I have a question. I haven't read the book yet. I have to confess. So if this is in there, I apologize. Newly single, was married a long time, 3 kids, and first time in my life. And when I'm with someone, I find the motivation to cook easier because I'm also preparing for someone else. But when it's just me, and it's a very small apartment with a very small kitchen, so I still have to organize things, but finding the desire to, because everything is so easy. In the last 3 months, I sprained an ankle pretty bad. And then after that was almost done, I cracked a tooth and had to have an implant. So I got used to grocery delivery, meal delivery. Oh my gosh, you can get anything delivered and on a regular basis. So you don't have to go out anymore. And I would just wanted to know your thoughts on, and then not just single, but single in the pandemic. So we don't have dinners at my friend's house on her patio. Today we met outside at a picnic table. That would also work. But maybe some ideas on, if we don't have a family nearby, if we're empty nesters and single, how do we cultivate that? Because this is part of that big pandemic question, right? We're in isolation. There's no hugging. Our church isn't back yet. You know, how do we overcome some of those obstacles that are with us right now?
Marty, I love that you bring that up, because you're right. Like this, you know, as I was talking about before, the idea that I want to hug people, and for me, I realized I really want to smell them. So that's what I was talking about before when I was saying that I smell the perfumes of my friends, because that. So I feel that really deeply, and I feel that that challenge. Couple of the gifts that have come out of this pandemic would be, you know, isn't it interesting how the very technology that, you know, probably a year ago I would have said screens are, you know, pushing us apart from one another, and now here we are leaning into it, leaning into technology in order to connect. And so I'm so grateful that that we have that. So one, I would say I've been surprised by how connecting Zoom really is. Like, I got to tell you, I was pretty anti-Zoom-ish, but I now do my Bible study on Zoom. I do my weekly women's fellowship in Zoom, because because it's really oddly very connecting, and also can be a real space for intimacy and sharing. So so one is kind of thinking newly about ways to connect. So that's been helpful. And I love that you were saying that you were eating outside with people, and what that can be. So I love this idea that we can think about new ways, whether that be through technology or whether that be through the opposite of technology, which is sitting outside and eating with people. Then the other piece that I would add, I've got two more things to say. One is that, you know, that we can lean into the worthy work of doing, you know, of doing the work of cooking. You know, like we don't all want to cook every night at 6 o'clock or whatever. And there's something that's really beautiful about me accepting that's work, and all the work that I do is really for God. And I know that work is good because I know that Adam was working in the garden. So I lean into, like, for me, the dishes is really the work that I don't enjoy. And that has helped me find some joy in framing that up as worthy work that will have its dividends in me being closer to God. Now, I'm going to sound like I'm going to say the exact opposite, which is the last thing I'll say, which is there are seasons for everything. So this may be a season of, you know, you hurt your ankle, maybe we do get delivery, you know, and maybe this is a season of appreciating the worthy work of others, so that you can eat and heal. So I just want to throw that out there, that it's there are different seasons for different gifts and different invitations. And so we can lean into the joy of receiving and of allowing others to have that worthy work. So so maybe just even be open to that possibility as well. And I'm just gonna I can just, my light is so low, and I know that we're going to be wrapping up soon, but even so, I feel like with the sun going down, like in the next 3 minutes, you're not going to see me. So I'm just going to try to turn on this light without getting too much behind me. So I'm not leaving you and I can still hear you. So don't say anything mean while I'm gone.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody have a curveball that they're gonna throw? You know? I should ask Beth. Well, so I want to, let you, Melissa, one of the things I talked about with the other other pastors, I haven't talked with you about it yet, but I talked to the other pastors, and we felt a sense that maybe we should share this series, the sample sermons and the videos with some of our colleagues who haven't had the opportunity to collaborate, because this is such an exhausting time, in ministry.
Yeah.
And the feeling of the pastors who worked on this is it might give a breather,
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
everybody was like, oh, of course, that's what we should do, is trying to help. So the gift that this table will keep being extended.
Did we settle on the $99.99 price point for the people to buy into the sermons, or did we go down to $15? I couldn't remember, Rob.
I think we made a really good deal for them.
Okay.
I will say something Jim said earlier, invited in late. Jim is a great colleague, and I love Jim's preaching. He's I try to go around and listen to pastors preach, because I think that helps me develop my gifts. And it's so easy for me to listen to Jim. And so you guys, I know in Palmdale, know that he's just got a real nice gift. If you don't have the 25 or 26 minutes, I go a little bit shorter. So if you're in a hurry.
I was reading the sermons that all of our 6 other colleagues, and like far and away mine are like way longer. And Stephanie, is Stephanie still on? Stephanie Powell was here for a little bit. Her husband was the pastor at the church for 24 years before I arrived. He's now district superintendent, and he would preach longer than I did. So they think I'm a short preacher here. So, but thank you, Rob. Actually, Melissa, I just wanted to, 2 things. One, you had talked about the second book, and, not counting the recipe book, the $10 dinners, not that it doesn't count, but it's a different type of book. And I've heard musical artists say that the first album they put out, there's so much of them into that, because it could have been years that they were writing these songs until they had it. But then suddenly, if it's successful, now the publisher or the recording label wants the second one out in 8 months, and how hard it is for many to come up with that second album. What is the process of you writing this next book, whatever it is, and how are you seeing that?
That's an excellent question. I can speak a little bit to that idea of a freshman and sophomore outing in the cookbook space. So I kind of imagine what that might look like, because when I did my first cookbook, I had years of experience and wisdom and whatever, and then that gets out the door, and then suddenly I was like, oh wait, I owe you a second cookbook too. And that had to go out kind of a lot faster, and I think that what's your name, wrote Eat, Pray, Love. What's her name? Elizabeth.
Oh, I can't believe it.
Author of Eat, Pray, Love. Anyway, but she talks a lot about that, about what does she do? In fact, after she wrote Eat, Pray, Love, how does she come out with her, her sophomore outing? And I am grossly paraphrasing and reducing down to, leaning into the actual work itself, rather than, the press and the whatever, and all the, expectations or whatever. So I would think that that's pretty good advice, is to kind of lean back into the work itself. And for me, in my case, I really believe, for me, it's about being obedient. I I really feel like we are all called to do something really unique, and that God has us wired for that. And so I really try to find the place where God is saying, yes, that's the use of the gifts I've given you that I want for you, and for me to be obedient to that, and to kind of put blinders on whatever else is out there. But it's hard because, there are, especially, when when your work becomes public, there's certain expectations, right? And, and you get kind of known for one thing, and then you want to kind of, you want to be obedient to something that maybe is adjacent. It's tricky. It is tricky. I will say that. But for me, it really comes down to the everyday of, I need to show up and be obedient to what God has for me. So that's kind of my North Star, no matter what it is, whether that be cookbooks, whether that be, writing columns and, for food, or whatever it is, that's really my North Star.
Are you allowed to talk about what your next book is, or?
Oh, yeah, no, there's nothing to talk about. There is no second book. I mean, I'm joking, but not by much, because I don't know what it's going to be. I have some thoughts. I feel like I don't feel done with this conversation. And you hinted at it a little bit earlier when you mentioned the musician who says that you kind of have all of this that you put into your freshman outing, and we'll call this a freshman outing because it's the first time I've written a book that's not a cookbook. Mm-hmm. But one thing that I also I was very mindful of, is that it didn't have to be the be all and end all, because I was really struggling with that big grid and sort of saying, well, which 16 and what, and how only 16, and, and I will tell you another little secret that was actually originally 18. And then I combined two, and I got rid of one because I got to the end, and I will tell you, I actually sort of thought to myself, listen, there are more than 18. There are, hundreds, thousands. So, really, does it matter if I stop at 16 versus 18? I'm not, it's not like 18 is complete, but 16 isn't. So,
all right, once you pass the 12 disciples, you can do whatever.
Yes. So anyway, that's how we ended up at 16. So there we go. So I feel like the conversation continues with Tasting Grace. Pastor Robb knows that I'm writing some supportive content for both congregants, book study folks, and also for pastors. Maybe, I'm not sure. I don't know. I should say there's a draft of it, but I'm not. Pastor Robb knows. I was like, ugh, I'm too embarrassed even to send it to you. So, Pastor Robb, how shitty can a first draft be for a reader's guide, and it still be worthwhile? I don't know. We'll find out. So I think that I really feel like I'm almost feeling like maybe the next step is even thinking about what do food ministries look like, and how can this actually transform how we think about food in a little bit of a deeper way. So I don't know that it's really just next book. I almost feel like there's more to do here. So I don't know.
Yeah, maybe instead of tasting grace, it's giving grace.
Maybe.
And how maybe. Food is used to be a blessing to others, or.
You know what? Yes, and I love hearing ideas of like, oh, what about this? Could this a feature film? Okay, I like it. Well, in all seriousness, I actually was filming part of a documentary with a team from France. Whatever, won't get into all the details of it, but they actually were coming out here that week of like March 13th, and they were filming here. In fact, I think Pastor Robb, we may have even talked about it because the back when we were planning it, like in January and February, the church was going to be a part of it, and we kind of kept morphing and changing and reducing the number of people. And then, and they actually flew out from France.
Wow.
And flew into San Francisco. And I had to say to them, you just came from Europe. My daughter just had open heart surgery. Like, I can't. So anyway, they're delightful, wonderful people. But so whoever wrote Future Phil, I think it was Cynthia, I'm not sure, but you're not that far off. But anyway.
I know we're right at the end. Jim, did you have one more thing that you had wanted to say?
I just wanted to say, I preached on hospitality today, and there's all of your chapters. There's so much. I almost feel like I do them a disservice because I only touch on little pieces of it. But probably the part that really stuck out to me was you're learning from your mom about how people are more important than food. And this idea that if you're spending time, if you're still in the kitchen when your guests come over, then you need to simplify your menu. And I'm a Martha-driven person who's always wanting to do things, and she's not hearing any of this wonderful question that I'm phrasing, is she?
She may have lost it. Did you lose it? Do you have a volume button on your?
Her headphones died. Now she's trying to.
Yeah.
Type it in the chat.
There we go.
Okay, great. All right. It just fed back into I was like, when is it going to feed into my thing? So you're preaching about hospitality. I'm sorry. So I probably missed the last 15
No, that's
minutes.
okay. I was saying what I loved is the insight from your mom that people are more important than food, and that if you're still in the kitchen when the guests come, how your daughters would always be out there to greet them, that means you need to simplify your menu. And I just thought that was so good because I'm a person, one of my love languages is acts of service. So I love preparing and cleaning, and oftentimes I'm cleaning up while our guests are still here, and my wife has to say, just spend time with our guests, and I have to, oh, okay, yes. So I love that insight, and just wanted to thank you. That's all.
Oh, well, I'm glad you brought that up. I would say if I had to say one of the major themes throughout Tasting Grace is the idea of that slippery slope, and that idea that that we start out with this great nugget of truth and goodness, and that it goes down that slippery slope and sometimes gets wrapped in some of Satan's lies, and then it kind of morphs into this kind of bigger thing that we then swallow, all at once. And so what can start out as, this really great act of service, because we're imperfect, we can go down this slippery slope, and next thing we know, we are, we're Martha, right? Ignoring Jesus, right? So I love that you bring that up, and that theme of that slippery slope, and that's a lot in that hospitality space, because we do want to welcome people in our homes, but it can very easily morph into performance, which is not exactly what you were saying, but that idea that we would put ourselves a little bit on a pedestal is, directionally separating, not uniting. And so it's that subtle language, it's that subtle assumption and attitude, ways that we approach things. It's subtle, but directionally really important to be considering. Are we allowing food to push us apart, or are we using food to bring us together? And when we host people and say, I'm going to impress you with my company-worthy dish, or I'm going to, your friends will think you spent hours in the kitchen and you only spent 15 minutes, yay, you have lied to your friends successfully. We joke, but directionally, is that really bringing people together? Or is it making sure that you all think I'm a little bit better than I am? And that's directionally separating. So anyway, I'm glad you brought up that example.
Well, gosh, I really want to thank you for being willing to do this. I know that some of the other churches now that they've just started a couple of weeks ago, and so I know they'll probably want to have the opportunity to have a conversation with you. And just super appreciative. And I have learned that I'm going to be really thinking about if I've showered before we have a conversation and what I smell like. I'm going to be a little bit.
Well, but Pastor Robb, you have probably a solid 6 or 8 months before we'll have the hug again. So, you know, you've got some time to get that figured out. I didn't realize how much I missed people, how they smelled until I saw a friend of mine, and like she had like hair gel in, and I remember like thinking like even seeing her hair gel, and we met at the beach and far apart, like I immediately was like I miss that smell of that hair gel. Who knew?
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you all for being here, and we have kept you just Jim. Do you want to just close with a word of prayer over this?
Sure. Thank you, God, so much for this time, not just the 90 minutes that we were sharing this afternoon, this evening, but the time that we have been in worship over the last 7 weeks, the times that we have been reading Melissa's book, for the ways that you, God, have used her words, her stories, the scripture connections, the invitations to touch us, to encourage us, to challenge us, to push us into the directions you want us to go and to grow. And so we're grateful for all of this time. Thank you for the friendships that were made tonight. And we pray that you will continue to draw us closer to one another, to each other, and to you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much, Melissa.
Nice to meet y'all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa, Pastor Jim, Pastor Robb. Thank you.
Thank you, all of you.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Let's do this